You're at a gathering and someone asks what you think about last night's game. You pause. Not because you missed it, but because you weren't watching. Never were. And suddenly, there's this small tension in the room. Like you've admitted something strange. In a culture that treats sports fandom as a social default, not caring feels almost like a personality flaw. But psychology suggests something different. The people who don't obsess over sports aren't missing out. They're revealing something deeper about how they process meaning, connection, and identity. Let's start with the most obvious pattern. People who don't follow sports often have what psychologists call an internal frame of reference. Their sense of identity doesn't come from shared tribal experiences. They're not wired to feel belonging through collective wins and losses. Research on social identity theory shows that humans bond through shared symbols. Sports are one of the most powerful versions of this. When your team wins, your brain releases dopamine as if you personally achieved something. When they lose, cortisol spikes as if you've been threatened, but for some people, that mechanism doesn't activate the same way. Their dopamine pathways are triggered by different things. Mastery over a skill, understanding a complex idea, creating something from nothing. Sports fandom requires you to emotionally invest in outcomes you can't control, and for certain personality types, that feels exhausting. Psychologists link this to locus of control. People with a strong internal locus prefer activities where their effort directly shapes the result. Sports fandom is the opposite. You watch, you cheer, but you have zero influence on the outcome. For someone who values agency, that dynamic can feel hollow. Not obsessing over sports often correlates with lower conformity bias. These individuals are less likely to adopt behaviors just because everyone around them does. Studies show that people who resist popular trends tend to have higher tolerance for social ambiguity. They're comfortable being the only one in the room who doesn't know the score. But there's a trade-off. Sports create instant social currency. You can walk into any room and find common ground through a game. People who don't follow sports lose access to that currency. Small talk becomes harder. This isn't about being antisocial. It's about the cost of operating outside a dominant cultural script. Then there's the cognitive dimension. People who don't obsess over sports often show different patterns in how they allocate attention. Sports require regular tracking, stats, schedules, narratives. For someone who views attention as a finite resource, that feels like a poor investment. There's also an emotional component. Sports are designed to create peaks and valleys. Euphoria when your team wins, despair when they lose. For some people, that emotional volatility is energizing, but for others, it's destabilizing. They prefer emotional consistency. They don't want their mood dictated by something they can't control. Psychologists call this affect regulation. People with strong affect regulation avoid situations that trigger unpredictable emotional swings. They're not emotionally flat. They just choose their battles carefully. But here's where it gets more nuanced. Not all non-sports people fit this profile. Some genuinely wanted to care about sports but couldn't force the interest. They tried watching games, learning the rules. Nothing clicked. And now they carry a quiet sense of exclusion. This reveals an important distinction. There's a difference between actively rejecting sports and simply not resonating with them. The first is a choice. The second is a preference. For people who actively reject sports, it's often tied to a critique. The commercialization, the tribalism that can turn toxic. Their disinterest is ideological. For people who simply don't resonate with sports, the reasoning is quieter. They don't think sports are bad. They just feel nothing when they watch. No excitement, no investment. It's like listening to a language you don't speak. Neuroscience offers insight here. Mirror neurons are brain cells that fire when you watch someone else perform an action. They're part of why we yell at screens. Sports fandom relies heavily on mirror neurons. When you watch your team score, your brain simulates the action. But mirror neuron activation isn't uniform. People with less active mirror neurons might not feel the visceral thrill of watching someone else compete. They need to be the ones competing to feel engaged. That explains why some people would rather play recreational basketball once a week than watch the NBA every night. There's also the narrative element. Sports create stories, underdog victories, last-minute comebacks. For some people, those narratives are deeply compelling, but for others, they feel repetitive. Once you recognize the pattern, the magic fades. This connects to what psychologists call need for novelty. People high in this trait crave new experiences, unfamiliar ideas. Sports, for all their unpredictability, follow a formula. 2 teams, 1 ball, a winner and a loser. For someone who craves novelty, that structure can feel limiting. So what does all this reveal? People who don't obsess over sports aren't a monolith. They're not all introverted intellectuals who think they're above mass culture. Some are, but others are just wired differently. Their brains prioritize different stimuli. Their sense of meaning comes from different sources. The key insight isn't that one approach is better. It's that your relationship with sports reflects your relationship with collective experience. Do you find meaning in shared rituals? Or do you prefer individual pursuits? Do you need external narratives to feel connected? Or do you create your own? None of these preferences make you more or less human. They just shape how you move through the world. If you've never understood sports fandom, you're not broken. You're just paying attention to different signals. And the real question isn't why you don't care about the game. It's what you do care about. Because that's where your psychology lives. Not in what you avoid, but in what you move toward.